I like many of Yuval Noah Harari's views, but not this one.
A lot of people are concerned about the rise of nationalism, but I think we should be very careful to separate the good side from the bad side of nationalism. Obviously, ultranationalism, which becomes fascism and which leads to war and genocide, is one of the worst phenomena in human history. But nationalism also has a very bright side.
But how exactly do you separate the good side of nationalism from the bad one? Where exactly do you draw the line? When people literally draw lines on maps and they identify themselves with a territory, they exclude other people from it. And this creates an us versus them mentality, which is the beginning of separation and discrimination and conflict and violence and war. This us versus them mentality is at the root of the biggest problems that humanity is faced with today.
People imagine that without nationalism, we would all be living in some kind of liberal paradise. But much more likely, without nationalism, we would be living in tribal chaos. Because the big project of nationalism is to make a lot of strangers care about one another and be able to cooperate.
This perspective that nationalism prevents global chaos is very dangerous because in reality, nationalism exacerbates that chaos due to the us versus them mentality that I pointed out earlier, which inevitably results in division and conflict and war. This is why you see nations competing with each other. What we need is not national identity. We need global identity. We need to see ourselves as part of the planet. We need to see ourselves as humans above all. And the problems that humanity is faced with today are global. Environmental degradation, economic inequality, pandemics, wars, and so on and so forth. All people are affected by those to some extent or another, regardless of the nation that they are living in. So if we truly want to resolve those problems, if we truly want to see less chaos and more harmony in the world, we need to transcend our national identities. Only this way could humans come together, work together, and deal with the multiple crises that we are faced with today.
I come from a relatively small nation, Israel. It has just 8 million citizens. But still, I don't know 99.99% of the other Israelis. I don't know them personally. I never met most of them. I'm unlikely to ever meet them. But nationalism makes it possible for me to care about these millions of strangers and to cooperate with them. And this has been one of the greatest advances in human history.
Using Israel here as an example of nationalism's positive effects is highly problematic, considering that Israel has been fighting against other groups of people, other nations, other ethnic groups, other religious groups for so long. Take, for example, Israel's constant war against Palestinians. That is a prime example of the bad things that nationalism can do. It is not the bright side of nationalism. It is the dark side of it. And I'm not saying that only nationalism is causing that war, but it's definitely one of the forces that fuel it.
One of the other problems that often people cite with nationalism is that nationalism is a barrier for cooperation on the international level. The President of the US just recently said that there is a contradiction between nationalism and globalism, and that people should choose nationalism and reject globalism. But I think this is a mistake. It's a very simplistic approach, because there is no contradiction between nationalism and globalism.
This is another dangerously naive statement. Harari totally dismisses the fact that nationalism tends to prioritize a nation's well-being over global well-being. So there is a contradiction between nationalism and globalism. If by globalism, of course, we mean the pursuit of creating a healthy, harmonious world, and that nations tend to prioritize their own interests over global cooperation is something that we can see all the time. For example, when nations withdraw from international agreements or refuse to tackle global challenges such as environmental problems, nationalism creates a barrier between people and the global solutions that we need right now.
Nationalism isn't about hating foreigners. Nationalism is about loving your compatriots.
Nationalism, by its very nature, involves defining identity in opposition to others. It creates, therefore, division. It creates an us versus them mentality, as we talked again and again before. And while nationalism might not explicitly call for hatred or discrimination against foreigners, it always creates an environment where, to one degree or another, foreigners are seen as threats or enemies. So nationalism, although it can bring some people together, it separates them from other groups of people. And it inevitably results in conflict to one extent or another. And history has shown it again and again. Therefore, nationalism is not part of the solution, but part of the problem.